Hello and welcome to a daytime edition of the CBB Super Show brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, that niche sports connoisseur y'all know and love. Seeing me in the daytime, just make sure we're not dreaming, pinch ourselves. Yeah, we're out here. We're out here doing it. We're trying to switch it up a little bit. We got that nighttime crowd, which is really, really good, really great. Love interacting with you guys. Still going to be doing shows on Friday nights, late Friday night, as you all know and love. But we're going to do this during the day on Tuesdays and Wednesdays here for the foreseeable future. We'll try it out, see how it likes. Sometimes we'll go a little earlier in the day, maybe sometimes closer to lock. But yeah, we're out here doing our thing. I appreciate everybody who continues to support the show day or night, rain or shine. Before we get started, you guys have been doing a great job with this, but I'm going to ask, as a reminder, if you could please hit the like button if you're watching there on YouTube, especially if you're on Twitter/X. If you didn't mind checking in and clicking on the link for YouTube and getting over there and hitting us with a like. All of that helps so much. The algorithm-based universe that we live in, interactions, comments, questions, concerns, all of it, retweets, reposts, all help the show a tremendous amount. You guys have been doing very good with those interactions, and that has helped us a tremendous amount. We've also had a ton of new viewers here recently, and some of them have tried out the FTN fantasy site. We have some new subs in the community there, checking out the Discord and giving us a shot this week as we work our way towards March Madness. You'll see in the bottom there are links throughout for our various stuff. At the very bottom, there's the FTN pricing page, which will show you the different packages that we offer. For the not just DFS side, but we also have season-long dynasty, everything in the NFL, NBA, MLB world. We also have a huge betting team that is really, really good. They're great. We offer a ton of content there. And it's not just written content. It's not just video content. We also have projections. We have an opto. We have everything that you need. Our Discord is honestly what I feel like in the community, one of the best, always interacting with the community members there, especially in our Discord, the CBB and CFB rooms. We're posting starting lineups, any late breaking news. And, sometimes as a father, I get pulled away. I'm doing this daytime show. I've got my little son and daughter. They're out of school for winter break. My son's not in school yet, but my daughter is. She's watching them for me. Occasionally, they pop in and interrupt. And sometimes at nighttime, I got to get pulled away to do the dad thing. But that doesn't mean the information stops because our community picks up the slack. I've got them all basically trained there on the stat broadcast, which is a really great media site that shows the starting lineups. And they're always checking Twitter and everything as well. So I am very, very proud of our community in that regard. If you're curious what else we offer, if you're kind of trending or wondering about joining and becoming a community member, we have written slate breakdowns for the Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday slates right now. Daily projections for every slate, and that is not just the main slate, that's also night. We also cover some of the FanDuel stuff, primarily focused on DraftKings, which we're going to be talking about here this morning / afternoon. And yeah, everything that you need there in terms of helping you be a competitive lineup maker and profiteer in the CBB niche sports world. We're always after those green screens and window trips, and I am going to lead you to both for the rest of the season. Daytime show, my break, YouTube. Let's go. Let's go. I love it. Let's go. Daily show up and all the people in the Eastern and Central time zones. What's great is, yes, I'm on the West Coast. So, when I go on at 9, 10, 11, it's no real big deal to me. I realize it's pretty damn late for those of you on the East Coast, Midwest, Central time zones, but you guys are so committed to the show, the brand, everything, which I appreciate. You guys still show up in droves regardless of time. But yeah, sitting around yesterday thinking about it, I was like, there's no reason we can't do some daytime shows now. Let's do it. Let's get into it. Let's follow Mike Randall's lead, who did a great job on the betting show this morning. And let's break down this 9-game main slate that we have on DraftKings. Before that, we'll talk about some of the contests that they're offering. There's a $20K to first. Yeah, don't adjust your screens. $20K to first, $20 entry, 3,529 entrants. A lot of people don't play CBB until closer to March in the tournament because the contest sizes maybe aren't the biggest compared to NBA, NFL, MLB. And I understand that. I get that. I do. But, eat, sleep, and drink college basketball the way that we do. We're playing 1K to first, 2K to first tournaments all day long. Money is money to us, but the 20K to first should bring us a vast amount of unique users, not just the regulars there. There was also the 222, which I believe was a 10K to first. That has already filled. It was a little bit on the smaller side. And then a qualifier for the Mania number 33 and 34 at the $60 and the 250 level, I believe. So still plenty of opportunities to qualify for the Mania if you haven't done so yet. There's a larger $5 tournament. They actually just dropped a second one. There is a 33 that's larger than it's usually been, 141 entrants. That's 1K to first. So there's a vast amount of opportunities here for you to make some extra money. And not just that, there's also a 6-game night slate, which brings with it a 2K to first, $10 GBP, and a bunch of other stuff as well. But we will, for sake of time, keep our attention and our focus on this 9-game slate. Right after the show ends, for those of you that are a part of the Discord and the community, I will be dropping the slate breakdown, which will rehash and go a little bit more in depth about what we talk about here on the FTN site, and then projections with at least 2 to 3 hours to spare here. Just a few more tweaks and edits here, but we're going to show off some of the projections that we have here. If this is your first time watching, we do go game by game, the tried and true method of breaking down a slate. And in the background while I'm talking, you're going to see some of the projections, what it looks like. Not only, the fantasy points, the X value, all of that good stuff, but also maybe some prop betting opportunities there as well when it comes to points, assists, rebounds, all of that good stuff. So without further ado, hey, Bluffy, I don't think you sleep. You're like me, man. You don't sleep. You're here at night. You're here today. I love it. I appreciate your support. You've been you showed up a couple of weeks ago, and I do appreciate it very much. And then my man Jamie, a regular. My March appliance goal this season is a Jura. I might not be as domesticated as I need to be. What's that? Oh, a coffee machine. Okay. Jura Electro Apparate. That sounds pretty damn fancy. Latte, macchiato, cappuccino, and espresso. Wow. That is pretty freaking fancy. Straight from Switzerland, huh? How much does one of those run you back? $2,000. Woo! Okay. All right. Yes, let's do it. Let's get it, man. We're on it. We're on it for sure. All right, let's get into the first game on the slate here. Let me get this out of here. Share screen. If I have to pop out for a second, it's just because of my kids, but we're going to try and go faster. We normally at night go the whole 2-hour route, but we're going to try and go a lot faster than that. So rest assured. Let me get to my custom layout. There we are. Okay, let's do this. First game on the slate here, Connecticut versus Villanova. I'm not going to be rostering Ken Kniff today. This is a total of 137.5. Connecticut is an 8.5-point favorite. Our illustrious leader of the betting side and our chief content officer, Mike Randall, all over Villanova plus 8.5. He kind of came to the same conclusion I did. I don't ever like betting on Villanova. They are a little bit better than they were early in the season when they were never covering. And it's tough, but the huge spread here, relatively speaking, of 8.5 in the direction of UConn. They're just not last year's UConn. They're not the year before UConn. They have holes, and it's just been pretty tough. So I agree with him on that Villanova bet there. With that being said, we have some fine DFS options here that we want to look at. I'm going to try to streamline this so we can try to get done in an hour. I know that's a little tall task for me, but let's pull up the screen here. Hassan Diarra, that was the big one going into the last slate that we weren't too sure about, right? He was banged up. He didn't start. How many minutes was he going to get? He did end up playing a fair amount, and he easily usurped value. If you used him and you took that risk, it was the last game on the slate, you were handsomely rewarded with 26.75 fantasy points. He played 29 minutes against Seton Hall. That ended up being a road loss. I was worried about DR because I said on the show, hey, they're not going to need to use him much, will they? They should be able to beat Villanova. Keyword should. Or sorry, Seton Hall. Seton Hall's not particularly very good. Even if it's a home matchup, should UConn need him? Probably not. Well, they did need him, and they ended up losing that game. So you just never know. College basketball, we're in that realm. We're in that universe where anybody truly can beat anybody at any time. So with that being said, Hassan Diarra is only priced at 5-1. I would suspect we get him into the starting lineup. Regardless, we know he's going to play over 25 minutes pretty easily, even if he doesn't start. So expect Hassan Diarra to be really chalky. The starting five that they ran with: Alex Karaban, Solo Ball, Liam McNeely, Samson Johnson, and Jalen Stewart. Stewart played 18 minutes and then made way for Diarra. So expect Diarra to slide in the starting lineup there for Stewart. And of course, now that McNeely is back as well, bench pieces being then Stewart, Terrace Reed, and Aiden Mahaney, who's playing less and less these days. Terrible systematic fit. I would expect Mahaney to hit the portal the second the season ends for the Huskies. So Hassan Diarra, easy play number one there. Expect him to be in the majority of high dollar cash games, your opponent's lineups. Everybody's going to be rostering Hassan Diarra. Very easy play. After that, you have a pretty moderately priced Alex Karaban at 7-2, who hasn't been too exciting this year. We kind of thought he might struggle as the alpha there. I think Liam McNeely takes that spot. He's priced at 7-8, which is fair for him as well. I think either one of those plays is fine if you want to go with a more safer approach to the slate. A multi-UConn lineup could potentially work. I'm not all that comfortable with it, but those prices for Karaban and McNeely are hard to ignore, both under 8K, both playing huge minutes. And you can see here, I have Karaban right around 37 minutes, McNeely right around 36. They typically play anywhere from 36 to 38. They're going to be in there for majority of the game. So they're relatively safe options in that regard. Solo Ball, same thing, doesn't project quite as well. He's a pretty nice GPP look that's going to have sub 5% rostership. He can get high. He is taking a ton of shots regardless of McNeely being around. You want to get ahead, try to find some leverage in a giant tournament to win $20,000. Solo Ball is not a bad way to do that. And then as far as the front court options go, Samson Johnson, this is a new record. I don't know how he did it, but he was able. It was overtime, but he played 36 minutes. He did get 4 fouls, but the big thing here, Samson Johnson played 36 minutes. I don't know if he'll ever play 36 minutes in a game again. That meant Terrace Reed played only 9. You guys know all season long it's been super tough to play either of them. We've had some really nice games out of Terrace Reed, some slate-breaking performances, in fact. He wasn't particularly great in the first matchup against Villanova. Not a lot of trust there for me. He's priced at 6K. That's going to be a tough one. If he were to play, 25 plus minutes, or he played 36 minutes like Samson, he would break the slate regardless of opponent. So keep that in mind. Minutes based here is going to be very important. And then Samson Johnson is only at 4-5. I'm not looking at rostering him. That is a value piece that we can consider, certainly. But we sorry, my kids are now messaging me on my computer. It's popping up. But he is a fine value if you want to use him. Well, 1 second. Yes. Can you reach it? That's all right. Rather you ask me instead of break something. All right. Sorry about that. As far as Villanova goes, Eric Dixon is relatively cheap at 8.5 compared to where he has been. He's now cheaper than Wooga Poplar. Wooga Poplar, the most expensive on the team, at 8.9. Wooga has delivered us some really big games here recently. After the incident where he got tossed from the game, he has been completely unstoppable. He had a down game against Providence, but the last 5 to 6 minute stretch, he took over. They did end up losing that game, but Wooga ended up finishing with 35 fantasy points and basically making value and then some at that 8K price point. Now he's at 8.9. Going up against UConn in their first meeting there, again, it wasn't a particularly great one. This is a spot where I'm not rostering any of the Villanova guys. While we think they can cover, I don't particularly love the fact that they are going up against a pissed off UConn team for the most part. There is some value that is worthwhile in Jameer Brickus at 4.9. He does project well. If you go down here and look right around, his minutes have been ramping up as well, right around 31 minutes. He's just under 4X, but anything over that should put him relatively close. So we do want to consider him because he's played 34 and 33 minutes over the last 2 games. Doesn't have a great upside ceiling ratio, any of that, but he is out there on the floor. But a secondary value piece for sure, nothing really special. Hey, good to see you, Jason. Glad you could make it. I know it's a little bit strange seeing me here in the daytime, but here we are. We're out here and we're doing our thing. All right, let's move on to the next game. Purdue versus Michigan State. Total of 148.5. Michigan State is a 3.5 point favorite. Let me get that pulled up here. By the way, in that game that Villanova and Connecticut played last time, it was a 2-point victory for Nova. Eric Dixon was absolutely unstoppable, and he got to the line a ton. Ua Poplar was also very good. So we'll see what kind of adjustments they make in that one. They also didn't have Liam McNeely for that game. So some differences to be had here for sure. And I have this conversation with Aaron, one of our community members, all the time. Maybe not so much recently, but the game times, whether it's I do feel like it kind of, has an advantage one way or another. And I tend to not want to be too loaded up on that first game. If it's worth it, for sure. But it is something with the injury news, surprises, all this stuff that's happening. It makes sense to keep some of that PMR available for the later games. So kind of affected there to a degree. All right, Michigan State, we do have Jeremy Fears at 5.1K, coming back after missing just a game or two. He was relatively cheap right away. He's still worth a look, but typically with Michigan State, they have such a deep rotation. They're playing 10, 11, 12 guys. It's pretty difficult to get to. Even in what was a close game against Illinois up until the last, 10 minutes, they ended up playing everybody at least 9 minutes or more. Nobody saw more than 29 minutes, which was Jackson Keeler. And it was worth noting that Morris Johnson broke his wrist for Illinois. And after that happened, Michigan State just took over, especially in the front court. Jeremy Fears as the starter. They've been bringing Trey Holloman off the bench, but Izzo has indicated that Holloman is going to play a lot of minutes at the point, and he did play 26 off the bench. We actually saw Jaden Akins, and it didn't appear to be an injury. I only watched the second half of that game. There didn't appear to be any injuries, but he was seemingly benched there in the second half because he didn't play at all down the stretch. Only 18 minutes for Jaden Akins, and they ended up playing Fears, Jace Richardson, and Trey Holloman that last 8 to 9 minute period. So I don't think it's a situation where Akins is going to end up not starting today, but that is worth noting that his minutes were kind of dipping there a little bit as they play Holloman more. Akins expected to be the star on the team, right? Taking all the shots. Just hasn't worked out for him. He's not an alpha, similar to Alex Caravan. Can be very productive, but he's just not that go-to guy. He's more of a secondary, a Scottie Pippen to the Michael Jordan. There's no shame in being that. But you either have it or you don't as the alpha guy that you can rely on. I don't think anybody at this point would say, hey, the game's on the line. Let me give it to Jaden Akins and let him work. I don't think so. Spot up shooter? Sure. If you can get him a look like Steve Kerr, absolutely. But with that being said, Fears definitely worth a look here. A lot of money coming in on Purdue side betting wise as a 3.5 point dog. It makes sense. What was it? John Rossing posted this morning that Purdue had the 9th best odds for winning the title. Michigan State 16th best. I don't really care too much about that, but some kind of an interesting note that's going out there, and all that money, well over 50% coming in on Purdue. So kind of an interesting look there. I do think the Spartans are better than people give them credit for. They had a little bit of a skid there, but March Tom Izzo, there's just something to be said. With Fears at 5-1, he's definitely a guy to look at. I would be much more confident if he were playing up to 27, 28 minutes more often instead of that low to mid 20s. But you see last game, 23 minutes, he did have 5 assists, 4 rebounds, 4 points, stat lines like that. Definitely still getting it done this close at 5-1. He's in consideration. Don't love his individual matchup, but he is out there as a cheapie starting point guard getting enough minutes. Trey Holloman also interesting at 5'5". They're going to need a big game out of him. I kind of like him for GBPs, and you might look at his logs this year and think, well, he's nowhere near the optimal of a large field tournament, but he is taking a ton of more shots here recently. He took 12 against Illinois, 12 against Oregon, and 8 against Indiana, so they're ramping him up, and there was only one of those was a 3 against Illinois. He's kind of looked at as the best 3-point shooter on this team, but he's doing a lot of driving, getting to the line, making things happen. So Trey Holloman is having to take over a lot more, and he's done quite well with that. Secondly, the front court for Michigan State, Jackson Keeler went nuts last game, and you might look at it and say 6'5" for a guy that could drop 60 or 45 fantasy points. Yeah, I'm all over that, but I would advise you to pump the brakes. He's had 2 really strong games over his last 3, but you look at the minutes, he played 30 minutes against Illinois. He put up a big score. He played 31 minutes against Oregon. He put up a big score. Both of those teams had some front court options that required that. Purdue does not have Zach Edey this year. I don't know if you knew that or not, but in case you didn't, I'm letting you know. So I don't know that Keeler is in store for a 30-plus minute game. Reason being, Zappala Xavier Booker, Carson Cooper, Cohen Carr. They have all these various options in the front court. And you can see it's really hard for me to sit here and try to project their minutes. I mean, all the guys here, I've got Carr around 17, Cooper around 18. And that could very easily flip-flop. And they do ride the hot hand a little bit. There's been games where Cohen Carr, he plays 28 minutes and he's had a huge game. Jackson Keeler, same thing. Some of them are cheap, like Xavier Booker at 3-4. And if you catch him on a game where he plays 18 to 20 minutes, he hits some threes, which he sometimes does, you could have yourself a really nice 2% value play. These guys are actually excellent value options to rotate through in your large field GPPs or in that chase for the 20K. I don't think any of them can rightfully get into your main lineup except for maybe Jeremy Fears. As far as hey, Mama Rocks Homestead. I love it. There's people, I'm getting some DMs too, people catching us live because, we're not up until 1, 2, 3 in the morning here. So this is something that I'm going to try to do a little bit more often. And I do appreciate you showing up. Always good to have Mama Rocks Homestead on the show here. Appreciate the compliment. As far as Purdue, I know we got to wipe the bad taste out of our mouth. I was all over Braden Smith and a lot of people were last slate. And, I almost feel like I was a bit of a jinx in a way because I had mentioned one of the last few pay-ups that has not wronged us yet, Braden Smith. We got to go with Braden Smith. We have the value, 10.8K. It's a big price, but let's do it. And he did play all 40 minutes as he usually does. And he had 12 assists, which is great, 5 rebounds, which is great. But he only had 6 real points, 2 for 10 from the field. He had 29. So it's still great because Braden Smith only scored 6 real points and put up 30. And that just shows you what kind of massive upside he has here. Very tough spot going in and at Breslin playing Michigan State here. Certainly not going to be an easy game by any means. I do think we see some lower rostership on him as people tend to, get a little bit bent when somebody burns them. But he's going to obviously have to have a really big game here in order for Purdue to actually win. He's been pretty similar on both the home and road splits. He's going to take a ton of shot volume. Look for him to get back on track here. It's still a very big price, and there's enough value for us to make it happen here as we get into Florida and some of these other teams. And looking at the general, TKR, Braden Smith, Ish Leggett, John Tanya, JT Toppin, like that's our pay-ups to work with. Eddie Lampkin, who I typically like most games, but I mean, these are some pretty high prices to pay for some of these guys. I do think the return of the balanced Betty lineup, semi-balanced lineup might be in order here, but if you are going with a pay up, I do think it has to be Braden Smith. JT Toppin's been great as well, but that the rug pulls exist with him. Some games he plays a little bit lower minutes, some games he gets fouls. TKR on Braden Smith's team here, he's been very good, but 10-2 is a pretty steep price to pay for him, in my opinion, especially with that front court that the Spartans have. So I think Braden Smith is your obvious top pay up option. And even though he busted last game, still a 30 as a bust is pretty safe and makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. As far as anybody else, CJ Cox, he was the value on that slate where I kind of waffled about, and we ended up playing some DePaul value. It didn't work out as well. A lot of people did. Kicking myself because Cox was on my short list, and he had a really nice game, 13.6 rebounds, 25.5 fantasy points. He's really coming into his own. He's priced at 4.9 now instead of 4.1. It's a little bit difficult to get there. But as all of the non-Braden Smith options on the team, he would be the one I'm most apt to play. But you can see nobody really projects all that well on Purdue. So no real surprise there. Jeremy Fears being the top. And Jackson Keeler, it's a little skewed because I'm projecting him for 24 minutes. Anything over there, he's going to hit value. I just can't confidently tell you one way or another if he's actually going to get those minutes. And I don't think Sparty fans can either. All right, next game on the slate, we have Syracuse versus Pittsburgh, total of 146.5. This is a 10.5 point spread in favor of Pittsburgh. This is another one. I watched Randall's show this morning, and I agree with him on this as well. Syracuse, a team that we don't ever feel good about betting on. And in fact, rarely do. Pittsburgh, same kind of thing. And I don't know that they're 10.5 point favorites over anyone, even a team like Syracuse that hasn't really been that good. So I think there's a great betting opportunity here for Syracuse plus 10.5. As you can see, Pitt guys are projecting pretty well. Syracuse, not so much. Syracuse has been a sieve when it comes to bleeding fantasy points. Looking at it, we do not have any Damian Dunn action. He is going to be out for the season. And then we had Joanne Lowe out last game. He is expected to return. Brandon Cummings, the talented freshman who has broken a slate or two already this year, did play a tremendous amount of minutes and slid into the starting lineup with low out. When they're at full strength, Cummings' minutes are pretty non-existent. But if you go back 2 games ago to SMU without Dunn, he played 17 minutes, which wasn't a ton, but it was more than he's been playing, the 6 to 7. And he put up 12, 1, and 3. And he put up 22 fantasy points, back-to-back games over 20, priced at 3.7. He will go back to the bench with Low around, and that's fine. But I do think there's a very good chance Cummings plays close to 20 minutes today at minimum. His style of play is chucking 3-point shots. That can hurt Syracuse. So I do think he's a bit of a sneakier look here. It's just tough to sit and say, hey, here's what his minutes are going to be. He doesn't project very well. It's just one of those secondary GPP large field plays that Cummings sub 5% ownership could end up being a nice look there. And he's definitely in that category of it's less about his actual score and more about what he can do for you. But keep in mind, we don't have the most stellar of pay-ups on this slate. At least that's how I feel. You do have some nice mid-range options after that, though. Cam Corhen at 5.7, Zach Austin at 6.9, and then Lowe's price has dropped significantly. He's sitting there at 8.4 compared to his backcourt mate Ish Leggett at 9.7. And we've been kind of going back and forth on these two. When Leggett's cheaper, we go that direction. When Lowe's cheaper, we go that direction. This is a pretty steep discount. Expect Lowe to get back up into that mid to upper 30s playing time almost immediately. He's had a few rough outings because his shot has kind of fallen by the wayside, but he's still contributing a ton in other categories, and it's somebody that we can certainly feel good about. In a close win, 77-73 on Syracuse floor back in late January, he did score 22 points and dealt out 6 assists. Didn't make any threes, but he took 19 shots. 37 fantasy points at 8.4. We would absolutely love that. And as you can see here, the projections definitely like him at 36 minutes, which is pretty accustomed for. 36 fantasy points, well over 4x. He's definitely a strong main team play and somebody that you can build your lineups around and feel pretty good about that, even coming off of a 1-game absence. As far as Zach Austin and Cam Corhen go, not a lot of trust in them for me individually, but Corhen is only 5.7, 33 minutes against Miami. Granted, that was a very bad Miami team, so can't get too excited about that. Syracuse does have some size with Eddie Lampkin and some toughness there. In their prior meeting with Syracuse, Corhen did deliver 12.7 rebounds, had a few blocks, put up 25, more than enough there at 5.7. And you can see at the minutes that I expect somewhere between 30, 31, he does project pretty well there. So he is the other pit play that the system likes. Zach Austin might feel a little expensive at nearly 7K, but definitely worthwhile. And then you have Guillermo Diaz-Graham, who has slid back into the starting lineup here recently. He's priced at only 4.4, but you see he played just the 20 minutes. He's a hard one to peg with Coach Capel. Sometimes you'll see him spike up to 30 minutes, and that's where he puts up those big scores. Sometimes you see him play only 10 minutes. So right in there around 20 minutes, just under value. They're definitely in play because he's cheap, but there's some risk involved there. We also saw Amzal Deliak play a lot of minutes there. That was without Lowe. You might look at him and say, oh, 3.5, she played a lot of minutes. Maybe we can look at him. Not so much. That was without Lowe. I think his minutes go back down. If you're going to get cute with a bench piece on Pittsburgh, I think it has to be Brandon Cummings. As far as Syracuse goes, Eddie Lampkin's been great. He's very expensive now. I typically like to look at his props, rebounds mostly, but nobody on the Syracuse side projecting all that well, and I wouldn't be that high on them either. JJ Starling's certainly worth a shot at 8.2 in that mid-range build, and it is worth noting that Petar Mastrovic, the backup center, has seen his minutes ramping up. He is definitely going to be a guy next year that we're talking about a lot more. He's somewhat of an interesting secondary value there at 3.8K. All right, let's move on to the next game. I'm going to try to go faster here. Talking about 10.5 for JT Toppin. Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. He can definitely hurt you, right? He can definitely hurt you if he gets into foul trouble or goes Malik Dia, full Malik Dia. There's some programs, coaches who just go full Malik Dia. I think that's what we're going to call it now, where it makes no sense why they're not playing, more minutes. We're getting rug pulled after a couple of minutes. Very frustrating. JT Toppin definitely falls in that. Remember, there was that stretch of 2 to 3 games where, God, he was playing, like 18 minutes, 22 minutes. It was very odd. Anyway, we'll get there. Oklahoma versus Florida is our next game. Total of 156.5. This slate, a little bit different than the weekend slate. We've got some higher totals on board. Florida is a 13.5 3-point favorite. We have some value here on the Florida side. Let's start with them. We know that Sam Alexis is out. We know that Alex Condon is going to be out, but surprisingly, they got Micah Handlogden back way sooner than we expected. He was thought to be out the entire season. They get him back. Wasn't sure what to expect in his first game back there against South Carolina. Ended up being a blowout. Florida is just a terminator of a team. Micah played 20 minutes, 2 points, 2 steals, 2 blocks, 5 assists. That was interesting. And 3 rebounds, put up a hearty 20.75 fantasy points. He is priced at 4.6 now. Very much in play. Obviously, I only have 1 game to work off of, so he's going to project over value based off of that, or pretty close, I should say, at 20.8. So he's right around 4.5. Obviously, take it with a grain of salt because we don't have a lot of logs to go off of, but we know how good Micah is. We know how productive he can be from his past. In Oklahoma, even with Jelon Moore, and some of their other front court options like Sam Godwin, who's probably going to get 3 fouls in 3 minutes here in this one, they have been just bleeding fantasy points. So I like Micah's chances here if he sees 20 minutes again of making value at a sub 5K price. We also have to heavily consider Elijah Martin, who is priced all the way down at 6.3, even though he returned after a slight or a small absence, I should say. He did not start. Denzel Aberdeen maintained his starting gig. Martin played 24 minutes off the bench there against South Carolina. He was productive enough, 11 points, 2 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2 steals, only 6'3". If he slides back into the starting lineup for Denzel Aberdeen, I don't know how we wouldn't throw Elijah Martin in there. And even if he doesn't start, I'm still pretty confident in him as a play overall. You can see we're really getting a kind of a marquee brand favorite mid-range lineup here, or slate, I should say, with all these various options between 6K and 8K that look pretty appealing. Martin, solid enough rates this year, 24.6% shot rate, 22.4% usage rate, shooting 35% from long range, contributing a 3.5% steal rate and drawing almost 3.5 fouls per 40. So it's just a cheap price for a guy who, been priced at almost 9K at points this season. So some value pieces there on Florida to consider. Thomas Ha, he's been great. The last 3 games, last 4 really, he's been over 28 fantasy points. Even with some other pieces back like Martin and Micah, he still got 30 minutes in a blowout win over South Carolina, 26-3. He flirted with a triple-double the game before that against Mississippi State. He is just playing out of his mind. He's priced way up there now at 8.1K. Somewhere here we're going to have to back off a little bit, but he still projects pretty well over 30 fantasy points. I don't think he will. I think he's going to be just fine, especially in a game here against Oklahoma in which they should have really no problem dispatching of them. The Sooners, they have some issues here, and I feel for Porter Moser because the Oklahoma conglomerate is starting to murmur about a possible hot seat and his contract and all this other stuff. They desperately need a win, especially one like this over Florida, but I really doubt we're going to see them come through that way. Ruben Chinyello there at 5'2", still a value piece. Even without Alex Condon, they still have a fairly deep rotation of bigs. So you have to be really careful there. Will Richard at 6'4". He has been a really solid fantasy option throughout, but his minutes definitely took a dip last game. It wasn't Denzel Aberdeen when Elijah Martin came back. It was Will Richard. So we'll see how that shakes out there in terms of minutes. And then Aberdeen, I expected him to cool out last game. He didn't. He was really good. If it turns into more of a non-competitive game again, I could see a lot of Denzel Aberdeen usage in the second half. So I don't want to write him off completely there. He's still an affordable price at 5.9, but there are more mouths to feed here, even without Condon or Alexis. So mainly looking at Micah Handlogden and Elijah Martin as those main team looks, but you can rotate in any of them. Walter Clayton also at 9.3. Can't forget about him. He is a great overall option, but I typically like him in a more competitive game. As for Oklahoma, you have a sub 7K Jeremiah Fears. You got the Fears boys on the slate. He's kind of been in and out with some minor ailments. I don't necessarily like him as a play. I knew he'd be chalky last slate at 6'3", and he was just okay. I think he'll get some ownership here as well. Not that I'm afraid of Florida by any means. And they're not to the level of Houston, Virginia of yesteryear, where we just don't want to target against them at all. But I definitely, on a 9-game slate, don't want to go heavily against them, especially with Jeremiah Fears, who seems like he's stuck in a bit of a freshman wall. He'll get himself out of it, like we saw with Ian Jackson last game of North Carolina, but I don't know if I want to really look his direction just yet. I do like the depressed price on Jelon Moore at 6'8", is their best interior player, but he is going to have his hands full with that Florida front court. Sam Godwin, as we mentioned, he's going to be out there probably for 5 minutes and foul out quickly, and they'll have to go into their bench with the likes of some of the Glenn Taylors, Luke Northweathers, Mo Wag type of plays. Overall, it just looks all bad for Oklahoma. All right, next game. Here, let's go. That injury for Han Logden last year was brutal. Awesome to see him back on the court. Yeah, I've been making these comments because it seems very like in 20 years we're going to get some kind of like breaking, ESPN news or something, or investigative journalism, where it's going to be like there was some kind of super serum, cortisone shot that's getting these kids back, because there's been more than just Micah who have come back way before the timeline dictated, or they said, hey, this player is going to be out for the next 2 months. They come back in 3 games. It's like mind blowing. Coach Pitino with Davon Smith just recently, he's saying, he's probably not going to play anymore the rest of the regular season. We hope to get him back in the conference tournament. He comes in and plays, and he plays damn good off the bench in that last game. So yeah, mind blowing that Micah's back, but I'm glad to see it for sure. And then do we think Martin slides back in the starting lineup, or do they stick with Aberdeen? Yeah, I do think Elijah Martin goes back into the starting lineup now that we saw him after that one game. He's obviously a very strong play if he does, but that is my prediction there. Even if he doesn't, it might even be better if he doesn't, because maybe that keeps his ownership depressed a little bit, but definitely think he will. Craig, what's up, Craig? Feels like March Madness listening at work. Daytime shows, absolutely. And then Ha playing like player of the year lately. That's your guy. That's Balky taking a break from his sitcom, his 90s sitcom, to let us know. His guy, Tommy Ha. All right, let's move on to the next game here. Texas A&M versus Mississippi State. This is the total of 143.5. Mississippi State is a 2.5-point favorite. Man, I don't consider myself a jinx in anything. In fact, I've been the opposite. We've been tilting to win for many, many years now, but I feel like 2 teams in particular that I've given like a kiss of death to was Michigan State, but I think they pulled themselves out of it. And then Mississippi State, who is a team I still feel really good about making the tournament and being possibly a second weekend team, but they have just been getting throttled in different spots. And you have to make the recognition that the SEC is a damn hard conference to play in. And I think a lot of that has to do with it. If you put Mississippi State into, I don't know, the Big 12, the ACC for sure, they'd be a top 3 team with ease. This is a loaded squad with a ton of talent. They've lost some close games. They've also gotten their doors blown off by other players or other programs that are upper tier in the SEC, but I still have a lot of confidence in them. As 2.5-point favorites, I do like them to win this game. And I also think the total of 143.5 feels a little bit low here. We did see a slight shift in the starting rotation for Mississippi State. Riley Kugel did jump into the starting lineup there. Claudel Harris coming off of the bench. That is somewhat significant. Claudel has been the starter for most of the season, at least all of January and most of December. They have been playing Claudel about 18 to 24 minutes roughly, whether he starts or not. So it was kind of interesting to see. But Riley Kugel did enter the starting lineup and played 28 minutes. That was the first time in the calendar year of 2025 that Riley has started. The last time he started was back in December 14th. They have a bit of a deeper rotation there at the guard wing position, but it is worth noting that he played a ton of minutes there against Ole Miss, competitive game as a starter, 11 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, and 4 steals. He has fantastic steal rates, a very high shot rate. He is somebody we want to consider if he starts here for sure. And you can see at just 4.5K, moderately 24 minutes. Maybe that's a little on the low end for me. Anything above that, you can see is pretty much a smash. And you'll see there a lot of the Mississippi State guys are projecting quite well in this spot against Texas A&M. RJ Melendez was one of our top values last slate they were on. He wasn't that highly owned. He's still relatively cheap at 4.7, and he came through for us. I'm going to probably go right back to him. I like him a lot in this spot. He does have a tendency to get into some foul issues. We saw that a little bit against Ole Miss, but 17 points and 5 rebounds, hit a couple of threes there against Ole Miss on the road for a big 25.75 fantasy point game. He scored 19 plus in back-to-back games. So still really like him. He was only 4K on that slate against Ole Miss. I'm actually shocked he wasn't more than like 20% owned. Now that he's 4.7, it's a little bit higher. Perhaps that pushes some people away. But I like him a lot here in this spot. Yes, the Aggies have a endless amount of front court players who can body on defense, but I'm expecting him to get it done. And he's a versatile player in that he can hit threes. He can do a lot of different things. So between Melendez and Kugel, we have a nice chunk of value there that we can use. You have the starter in the front court, Michael Nwoko, who's only 4'3". He doesn't see as many minutes because he has Kashawn Murphy off the bench. They haven't made that switch from Murphy to the starting lineup because they like bringing him off in the second unit. You get the first unit a little bit tired on the other side, and Murphy comes in and just kind of punches them in the mouth. So they like that. But you can see Nwoko, 12, 14, 15 minutes, he's still putting up double-digit fantasy points with regularity. He's not a bad play at 4'3". Oh, he only plays 15 minutes. I think he still gives us pretty close to value there. You're not going to get a whole lot over. If there were ever a game where somebody was hurt or in foul trouble and he were to get 20 plus minutes, he would be an absolute slam. He's a very, very good player. And if you watch any Mississippi State games this year, he is one of the more active players on the court. So you have three value pieces you can look at. Claudel is very cheap at 4'3" as well. But again, his minutes have been dwindling, so I'm not really looking at him too much. And then that takes us to Josh Hubbard, Kashawn Murphy, and Cam Matthews. Matthews is cheap because he projects pretty well. He doesn't need to score in order to pay off. He's very active as well on the glass and via stocks. So I don't hate that idea of using him. And then Kashawn Murphy at 7'3" is a really nice 20K to first GPP play. Not a lot of ownership expected there. The fact that he comes off the bench is what normally scares most people. But you see 32 minutes against Florida, 30 against Georgia, 27 against Bama. Like, he's not starting games, but he's finishing in them. He's playing majority of the second half. He's been over 30 fantasy points in 3 of those last 5, and he hasn't been under 24 in any of those, despite the fact that he only played 18 minutes against Ole Miss due to fouls, and he still put up 26. That's right. Almost 30 in 18 minutes. Sean Murphy has fantastic rates across the board. Yes, he's a little spendy at 7'3", but we saw the pay-ups. They're just okay. We can fit Kashawn Murphy and maybe overpay a little bit and feel pretty good about it, I think. Josh Hubbard at 7'9". He'd be more of a secondary look, but it very easily could see him battling Wade Taylor anytime. 2 high usage guards going at it. We've seen Hubbard. He hasn't been making his shots as much, but he's still taking a huge amount and can absolutely blow the doors off of any slate. We saw he scored 38 real against Alabama just last month. He is a fireball that can go off at any time. Texas A&M, 7K price point for Wade Taylor. Very, very reasonable there. You can see at about 33 minutes, he projects well over value. Same with Zurich Phelps. Both of them are cheap. This looks like a really prime spot for a mini stack. Wade Taylor last game, it was a little bit of a struggle there at times for Texas A&M, but they did eventually pull away from Arkansas, and Taylor had, for my money, the best game of his season. And last year we saw Taylor, 9K player consistently, one of those guys that you were just scared to fade. 18 points, 9 assists against Arkansas. He has facilitated a lot the last 2 games, 12 and 6 against Georgia before that. He's been really good. So the 7K price point is really cheap for him. Maybe not as much full season this year, but his reputation and what we've seen in the past from him, this is a really like 1K, 1.5K too cheap. And we did see some vintage Wade Taylor in that last game. And I think he does show up here in a tough spot on the road against Mississippi State. So definitely like him there at 7K. Zurich Phelps at 6'6". It's been a bit of a learning curve for Phelps. When Taylor was out, Phelps got to do his alpha thing, which he did at SMU. With Taylor around, we saw there were some struggles. He had a 3 or 4 game patch there where he was barely registering 20 fantasy points, but he also looked great against Arkansas, aided by 4 steals. He does have a high steal rate, but 12 points, 9 rebounds, assists, those 4 steals, hit a 3, put up 32. So he's absolutely in play at 6'6" as well. I would rather just pay for Wade Taylor. I think I trust him a little bit more at this point, but either of them are fine. Nobody else really on Texas A&M that I'm in love with at this stage. Their front court is crowded between Henry Coleman, Pharrell Payne, Solo Washington, Anderson Garcia. I do like Pharrell Payne out of all of those guys. If you do want a front court option, he to me is the most talented, but minutes are a real problem there. And then Manny Obasake has been starting, but he's one of those starters who comes out early in the first half, ends up playing less than 20 minutes, can't really do anything with Manny. We really want to see late last season, 2024, Manny O. He's in there somewhere. Maybe they're waiting to unleash him when we get to March, but can't really use him as of this moment. Brett says, good show, first timer. Brett, I am appreciative of you. You're usually on late. So this is what I was hoping to get some new eyeballs on the show and show you guys what we're about. So I appreciate that support, Brett, very much. Glad we were able to do some work here for you. All right, next game on the slate, Colorado versus Iowa State. There's a total of 141.5, and the Cyclones are big favorites here, 18.5. Colorado's been atrocious this year. We know that. We are big Cyclones fans here at FTN. At least me and the community are. I think Randall and some of the other guys are coming around to the Cyclones, and we have them rated pretty highly in our ranking system as well. They're pretty cheap. As of now, I like some Cyclones options, and that shouldn't surprise anybody here against a Colorado team that is just putrid. Everybody 8K or less for Iowa State. We have been used to their top three, Keshawn Gilbert, Curtis Jones, and Josh Jefferson, being over 9K, which made it really hard to get to them. You're seeing that balanced approach here sticking out. Keshawn Gilbert at 6'7", that's damn appealing. 7-1 for Curtis Jones, pretty appealing. And then Josh Jefferson at 8K. Colorado will have no answer for Josh Jefferson whatsoever. Looking at the work he's done, he's been a perfect addition for this Cyclones team. And last time they played Colorado, it was late December, so a while ago. But he had 13 points, 7 rebounds, and he had a block party. And he ended up having like 11 stocks. I think a lot of those were steals. Put up almost 50 fantasy points. So this is what got the start of his price up to 9K plus. So the 8K is very, very reasonable for him. At home, I'm not as worried about foul trouble, and I don't think Colorado has anybody that can get him into foul trouble. So you can see Jefferson is a very strong overall option at this price point, just over 4.2x. Certainly want to get to one of these Cyclones guys, probably between Jefferson and Gilbert. I would expect a lot of ownership on Gilbert at that price, and probably a fair amount on Jefferson as well, and makes Curtis Jones a really nice look for GPPs. Jones is back to his bench role now that Milan Momklevovic is back. It's probably better for Jones because he can come on in that second unit and be the alpha and put up a bunch of shots like he likes to do. Doesn't give us as much peripheral speaking, but he does score a ton. And you can see he's definitely a high upside guy based off of the selection. If you've seen Iowa State at all this year, he's taking games over. Keshawn Gilbert at 6'7", though, definitely one of our main looks. Deshaun Jackson is cheap at 4'8". He also is a starter in the front court, deals with foul trouble, so he does cede minutes to guys like Brandon Chatfield, Nate Heisey, but he's certainly worth a look there as a secondary value piece. And then Milan Momklevovic at 4'5", playing around 25, 26 minutes. He's worth a shot if you want to get a little bit different and get your Iowa State exposure cheaper even than Gilbert. Milan makes a lot of sense. He is out there to chuck as well. He does take from Curtis Jones, so it makes it a little bit difficult because neither of them are going to give you a ton of peripherals, but they are going to shoot a lot. And Milan at just 4'5", he did hit 4 threes in his first game back against TCU. Can very easily surpass 4x at this meager 4.5 price. Took 10 shots against Cincy, 7 against UCF, and 9 against TCU. Should have no problem here against Colorado, but not a priority priority value piece by any means. Colorado side, I'm not targeting against Iowa State all that often. What?
He's climbing in the Harry Potter closet.
Okay. Okay, just let him. All right, sorry. That's the one trade-off about daytime shows here. Got the kids running around here. Anyways, Colorado. I'm not going to be using too much Colorado against Iowa State. I think it's a really horrible spot. Most of you would probably agree. But it is worth noting Javon Ruffin moved back to the bench. They started RJ Smith, who did have some starts earlier in the season before an injury took him out. He played 31 minutes there in their last game against UCF. And Sebastian Rancic, the freshman who started, played 30. So those two guys both playing a ton. I would expect RJ Smith to start again. You see he's only priced at 3.9. We give him, maybe a tentative 27 minutes, which I've assigned to him right now. Anything over 30, he's going to be looking like a pretty good value. I think a lot of his stuff will come in the second half. So if you do use him, don't panic if he's off to a slow start. But clearly, looking at the various options and how cheap all the Colorado guys are, he's the most appealing to me. Julian Hammond is also relatively cheap at 5.8 for his high usage, but it's going to be very easy for Iowa State to kind of key in on him. So somebody else is going to have to step up. In their prior meeting, it was a 79-69 victory for the Cyclones at Colorado's house, the CU Event Center. Hammond did have 21 real, so he had a nice game there. And RJ Smith hit a bunch of threes 14 points, 2 rebounds, an assist, a block, and a steal, and that was in 33 minutes. So there is a little bit of history there. Granted, short sample for Smith to play well, and he's only at 3.9 back in the starting lineup. Ruffin has been brutal for them, so it makes a lot of sense. Bangot Dak has major block upside, but foul issues are going to be still upon him in this game. Hassan Diop, Trevor Baskin, not Carol Baskin, and Elijah Malone, all of them rotating through. They're all relatively cheap after Bangot Dak, but I don't have any interest in them against Iowa State. I think they're just going to get absolutely dumpstered by Josh Jefferson in that front court, but I do have interest in RJ Smith there, obviously at that 3.9 price point. All right, let's move on to the next game here. Texas Tech versus TCU. This is a total of 140.5. Texas Tech comes in as 7.5-point favorites. Going back to Jamie's comment there about 10-5 being a relatively high price for Toppin. In a vacuum, as they say, maybe not so much. It is really steep when you consider those other factors that we talked about, though. He plays very emotionally, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's actually a great way to play. But he does sometimes get into his head. We see his minutes, sometimes he'll be as low as 18. Sometimes he'll play a majority of the game, like we saw in that ASU multiple overtime game. He obviously has crazy amounts of upside. I mean, he put up a 71 just a couple of games ago, a 60 against Oklahoma State, and that was in just 26 minutes, which is outrageous. 44 against Arizona, a very good Arizona team. So Toppin at, peak condition, 32, 35 minutes, no foul trouble, no emotional problems, no technicals, no injuries. Like, yes, he's probably the best. He's probably a better pay up than Braden Smith because we've seen him put up these huge slate breaking numbers. And if Toppin has anywhere near the ownership he's pulled lately, 50%, 60%, and he's dropping 70s, you're just simply going to be dead without him. But I don't want to feel obligated to do this with 10-5. The last time we did have a pay up on the slate was just a couple of days ago with the Axel Lindenberg from UAB, put up a huge number. We had that discussion like, can we fade him? We typically like to fade those high price guys, but he's going to put up a score that I think we can't live without. That was the case. Thankfully, most of us used him, but so did the whole entire industry. I don't get that same feeling with JT Toppin. I just don't foresee him on a 9-game slate being this highly owned. But with an influx of newer players who usually are in the NBA streets or elsewhere, I do think JT Toppin still sees a sizable amount of ownership, maybe in the 30% range in single entry, maybe a little bit less in the large field, just because of that major upside that he's shown. There is massive leverage for fading, though, especially since it's on the road. Foul stuff happens. Yes, he's not a big fouler. If you go through his logs and you look at his foul rates, it's not as if he's some kind of guy that has an 8 fouls per 40 rate, something that we need to be super concerned about. But he does get them at the most inopportune times. That is something that we've seen a ton. And there's been some really good spots where he has just completely trashed our lineups. We have to have a short memory in DFS. It's a good reminder to do so. But I do want to be a little bit weary of Toppin and stop short of calling him an absolute slam dunk. Because I think there is a lot more leverage to fading than using. When you look at his overall rates, thank you, 33% shot rate, 31% usage rate, a 27.6% defensive rebounding rate. That's top 15 in the country. 15.2% offensive rebounding rate. That's top 25. Block rate over 5%, and he's drawing 5.1 fouls per 40. So, I mean, there's a lot to like about JT Toppin. And if you sit there and tell me he won't have any issues, he's going to play 32 plus minutes, then yeah, he probably is a lock button pay up even over the likes of Braden Smith. And TCU is certainly a good on paper matchup. Ernest Uday is the only front court player that really stands in his way, and Uday has been dealing with major foul issues lately. I can imagine their game plan is going to be to attack Uday early and often and get him off the court. And as soon as that happens, JT Toppin is going to go to work. Now, I lean towards more of the discounted option of Darian Williams, who has been extremely pricey this year himself, dealt with some injuries, was in and out of the lineup there, wasn't needed much. It was a blowout win over Oklahoma State, so you can look at his 17 fantasy point game and kind of throw that out the window. Had a huge game in the multiple overtimes win over ASU, but a very steady performer and one that we can really reliably count on for all categories. This is the nice thing about Darian Williams, and we're getting him at a reduced price of 7.6K. So there's some built-in leverage there if Toppin does end up being chalky, and it's such a huge discount, nearly 3K. And you can see he projects extremely well over 4X. and that's at about 34 minutes, which I think is a pretty safe number to assign to Darian Williams. So he's the obvious choice for your main team. As far as the rest, Chance McMillan, Elijah Hawkins, Christian Anderson, those are kind of your second wave players. Most of the time they see over 30. If Toppin does get into trouble or Darian Williams is out, they pick up the slack. Chance McMillan is the one that I like the best out of that three. I don't think any of the other Texas Tech guys will find my lineup. It's going to be a decision between, yes, I'm playing Williams for sure. How much Toppin exposure will I have? Probably not as much McMillan, Anderson, Hawkins for me, but I do like Chance McMillan. He does fill it up across all categories as well and has a tendency to hit some big shots, especially late. We've had some pretty nice second half point props for him throughout. Federico, Kerwin Walton, and Kevin Overton. That's a hot hand situation or foul trouble. Yes, they're all cheap, but can't rely on them right now without any of that news ahead of time. And for right now, it seems like, knock on wood, Texas Tech has got a clean bill of health. As for TCU, it's a pretty big no across the board. Chase Posey did play 30 minutes for TCU and looked amazing. I expect his minutes to go up because of that. That's just going to come from Traz White, Noah Reynolds, Brandon Wenzel, out of that pool. Bashawn Allett has been the top option for TSU from a DFS standpoint because of his ability to rack up assists, steals, blocks, all of those categories, but he's priced up now at 7.4 because of it. Brennan Wenzel's probably your most reasonable TCU play, but I just don't think there's any upside here against Texas Tech. Even at home, I think they get mollywopped a little bit. So I'm going to move on from TCU and keep us rolling. There he is. My man T9. Love it. He's in the house. All right, let's go here. We're in the last home stretch here. Butler versus Xavier, total of 152.5. Xavier is a 6.5 point favorite. Now, these teams, I don't think they've played each other yet. They have another game at the end of the year, right? Yeah, so they haven't played each other just yet. That's okay. Get this pulled up. We got a massive, massive game out of Dallin Swain on the last Xavier slate. Xavier looked fantastic. Was really high on them heading into that last game. Let me pull that up real quick. Against DePaul. Ended up being a blowout. The DePaul value did us wrong. Unfortunately, they were popular. But we had to get some exposure on the other side. And that's some Zach Fremantle, certainly. But Dallin Swain, man, he is, out of everyone on the Xavier team, the most NBA, like the one that you could sit here and say that that's an NBA player with a lot of upside. It's still untapped. Dallin Swain is the answer there. He's only a sophomore, had 17 points, 7 rebounds, 8 assists, 2 steals. Very impressive stat line, but that was by no means an outlier. We've seen him plenty of times have these games, 18, 6, and 4 against Georgetown, 16, 5, and 5 against St. John's, 12, 9, and 3 against Marquette, consistently putting up these really impressive stat lines. He only has a 16% shot rate and an 18% usage rate, but he doesn't need to have a high usage rate in order to pay off. He's been very efficient. 3rd best true shooting percentage in the Big East, 10th best effective field goal percentage. He has a high block rate, a high steal rate, which he contributes in a ton. Great free throw shooter. Really, really good on the inside. Doesn't take threes. That's a bit of a problem at times, but he gets himself to the bucket. He gets a lot of easy looks. He runs the floor in every possession, and you'll see most Xavier games, he gets 2 or 3 breakout layups pretty much every single game. Love that about him. And his assist rate has gone up in conference to 18.2%, which is a top 20 rate in the conference. And his defensive rebounding rate is up to 17.7%, which is top 15 in the Big East. So a lot to like about Dallin Swain here. Projection-wise, his price has gone up, of course, at 7.2, but still just barely under 4X. He is the one that I'm probably going to go back to because that price hasn't gone up enough yet. I do like the matchup against Butler. Butler has looked better lately, but they're definitely a fantasy-friendly group for the most part. So I am on board with Swain. Zach Fremantle is a still fairly cheap semi-pay up at 8.7. He's looked a lot more aggressive. We were complaining a few weeks ago about how he's been a little lazy on the boards, but lately he's been crashing the boards, adding that, and he's been hitting more ceiling games. So he's a nice option if you've got that salary to 8.7. Ryan Conwell at 6.9 is a nice look, high shot rate. He's getting it done. Dante Maddox comes off the bench. He has that weird hitch double clutch shot, but it works for him. And then Marcus Foster kind of rounds out the playable options there. He had that massive career high 13 rebound game a couple of weeks ago. He's an okay option at 5.8, but the real decision I think lies between Dallin Swain and paying up to Fremantle. Also don't hate Ryan Conwell. And then Davion McKnight is still really cheap at 5.5. Doesn't look like himself. The shot attempts are just not coming for him because there's so many other mouths to feed. And normally he's the table setter. So you can count on him to, rack up assists. That hasn't been happening as much either. It is worth noting he looked really good against DePaul, scored 14 real points on his way to 26. That was his best game in about a month and a half. So maybe he's turned a corner, but it also was against DePaul. So we'll take that with a grain of salt. But the minutes are there. He's playing 30 plus. And I think he's going to get back to his high level facilitator role. It is worth a look somewhere and maybe an alt build in one of your secondary lineups. On the Butler side here, we have a couple of guys projecting. Okay, Andre Screen, who has fantastic rates across the board. I'm a little uncomfortable with him at 6'2". Does typically come off the bench, but he has been the most reliable, believe it or not, Butler piece. Just a very high fantasy point per minute player, gets it done on the glass, finds his way. He has really high level post moves, and he finds a way every game. It doesn't seem like he's going to get a shot off without getting blocked, but he finds that way. He scored double-digit real points in 3 of his last 4, and has just been sound throughout, 20-plus DK points in 4 straight as well. So he's our top Butler play overall. Jameel Telfort and Pierre Brooks both have upside at 7 and 7-1. Don't find myself rostering them too often, but I do like Pierre Brooks here today at 7K. It feels a little bit like chasing Shore after the 41 he just dropped on Georgetown, but he just gets hot and takes every shot. And when he gets into these kind of FU moods, a la Bill Simmons from like 10 years ago, explained the whole thing. He's just unstoppable, and he's shown that time and time again, especially here lately in conference play. So I like him as a GPP look, somebody who could wind up on the optimal. And then you have Finley Bizjack, the youngster at 5'9". It's a little high for him, but he's settled into a really safe role. You see he's played 28 plus minutes in 4 straight games, 2 of those against Georgetown, but he's put up 21 or more fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. He has been lethal from long range, 3 of 7, 3 of 4, 4 of 6, and 2 of 4 over his last 4. He has found a way, and he's holding off guys like Landon Moore, Colby King, some of the secondary options that were taking minutes from him earlier in the year. He's been much better, and he's been somewhat adequate on defense. One of the big complaints there was that he couldn't hold his own, and he had to sit because he couldn't defend, but now he's defended a lot better. We'll have his hands full against his Xavier team, but at 5'9", he's still very playable as well. All right, that takes us to the all right, let's see. Feels like tonight is the Fremantle smash. Game logs don't look great, but he's on the verge of a 40 burger. Yeah, and just the fact that he's not being, and I don't want to be derogatory. I hope it doesn't come off that way, but watching a lot of Xavier games because Fox just tends to be the channel I watch a lot. He's been really kind of just lazy on the glass. 3 rebounds against Georgetown, 5 against Villanova, 5 against St. John's. Granted, St. John's has a bunch of dudes that rebound well. It just didn't seem like he'd been rebounding at the same level that we expect, and he's turned that around here recently. Again, against DePaul, and then against a Providence team that doesn't have a ton of upside in the front court themselves. It'll be really telling if you can do that here against Butler and on the times when Andre Screen is on the floor. But yeah, I like that call for sure. He's been close here recently, but he's a very safe option. I think the 8.7 price might feel like it's a lot, but I think it's probably slightly underpriced. So that's a nice call out for sure. All right, last game on the slate, Illinois versus Wisconsin, total of 161.5. The Badges are 3.5-point favorites. I mentioned it earlier in passing, but Illinois will be without the services of my guy, Morez Johnson, who I absolutely love. Broke his wrist as soon as I think he broke his wrist, and now they're kind of like hemming and hawing about it, but the wrist injury, so he will be out for the foreseeable future. That's a pretty big loss for Illinois. I still like the long-term prospects of Illinois. I got into a argument with one of our old friends, Johnny, used to be on the show a long time ago, about Illinois' window being open for the next 2 to 3 years. He thought I was crazy saying that, but I mean, most of their rotation is freshman and sophomore players, right? And granted, I don't think Casper is going to run off to the NBA. I guess we'll see, but I think they'll get the majority of these guys back next year. And then, of course, the class, and then the transfer portal. Like, this Illinois team is set up for the next couple of years. The fact that they're so competitive with freshman and sophomore in their rotation kind of speaks volumes, especially in the NIL era, transfer portal era, where veteran teams are kind of the king right now. But as soon as Morez broke his wrist or went out with the wrist injury, it was about the 10-minute mark of the second half. The game was within 2 points there, and suddenly they just faltered and they couldn't keep going. Will Riley had a pretty poor effort in that last 5-6 minute stretch. And the Spartans just clamped down defensively on the road. But Morez being out was obviously a big difference there. So somebody's going to step up and take that starting spot. It sounds like it's going to be Trey White. Did my homework there. Trey White, who'd been out for the last couple of games. He was technically available last game. I am expecting him to jump into the starting lineup. I have put 25 minutes on him for now, but that could very easily go over 30. Coach Underwood, in his last interview a couple of days ago, was very adamant that Trey White is going to be the guy to slide in for Morez Johnson. They're going to need him to rebound at a high level. Trey White has been able to do that most of the season when given time. And he got himself up to nearly 7K at some points because he was having such a huge mid part of the season, averaging about 5.5 rebounds as it stands right now. Hasn't been particularly great because of the various injuries and illnesses that have hit the team and the emergence of Morez Johnson, the emergence of Will Riley. It's kind of pushed Trey White to the back of the line, as they say. But he's going to be, I'm almost certain that he's going to be the one starting. He's only priced at 4.5, and there's probably a really good chance that he plays over 30 minutes in this one. So I may have him under projected minutes wise there. And if we think he's going to play 30, you can see he's obviously going to be one of the better plays on the slate, perhaps the best X value return, almost 5X if we put 30 minutes on him. So I'll be a little bit conservative as I try to do where possible or kind of reel it in. But I would be shocked if he didn't start. So 4.5K, even if he doesn't start, he will play a lot from what I've said. And I don't think Underwood is the coach speak type. I hope. He hasn't let us down in the past, and he's been there for a couple of years, but he's obviously the play that we're going to want to get to. We've seen Kylan Boswell's price dip a lot because of the emergence of some of the other freshmen and sophomores. He's priced at only 5.4. I suspect he'll have to play over 30 minutes, so you can see he projects pretty well also. And then as far as Tomislav, Isevic, Will Riley, Casper, all three of those over 7K have to play a lot of minutes. Riley doesn't project as well as you'd think. He's one of those ones that because of the total season early in the year didn't have the best logs. That hasn't caught up yet. If you break that down to maybe the last 10 games, he would have a much better projection. So I don't mind Riley. I think Casper I like to call him Casper, by the way, in case you're wondering. I think he's a pretty solid look at 8.3, and then Tomislav at 7.3 is also a sound option. Have his work cut out for him with some of the front court options that Wisconsin has, Crowell, Nolan Winter on the glass. And if you can stay out of foul trouble, I definitely think he can put up a pretty sizable number. But I'm going to go with the cheapies here on Illinois side. Trey White for sure, maybe a splash of Kylan Boswell, but we know how inconsistent he can be as well. As for the Wisconsin side, John Tanya, he's really expensive at 9.5, and every time I think he can't pay that off, that's no way I'm going to be paying 9K plus for John Tanya. Get out of here. He continues to put up huge numbers, so got to stop writing him off. That Purdue game, that was a special effort, 32 real points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists. They did a real nice job on Braden Smith, clamped him down defensively, and it was just a really solid showing for John. 4 for 9 from downtown, 10 of 15 from the field. A monstrous performance. He has now put up 35 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. I will not keep writing him off because he keeps on doing this, but I don't think I can use him right now. Almost done. John Blackwell is 5'8". You can see he's the top projection. I'm definitely going to want some exposure to John Blackwell. He is a very strong look at that price point, and he projects this. So one of the better projections on the slate. And looking at the rates here, because John Tanya is due for a little regression, right? It's gonna be, he's up to the 7th on the Ken Palm Player of the Year rankings, by the way. Tanya, I think that surprised some people. But Blackwell, as far as their rates, they're pretty similar. Both have over 25% shot rates, 25.5% to be exact. Blackwell has a 25.1% usage rate compared to Tanya's 26.7%. And then Blackwell is shooting right around 35% from long range, while Blackwell shoots 41%. Very similar in a lot of ways. Tanya has been more efficient, but we've seen Blackwell. He has gotten it done. Tanya, his best trait there is drawing fouls. 6.6 fouls per 40. That's good for 30th best in the country. So he's gotten a lot of his points at the line. That hasn't been the case as much for Blackwell. He does have a tendency to rely on the 3 a little bit more. And as he's missed or had some poor shooting nights, we've seen a little bit of down performances, but that's led to this depressed price of 5.8. An excellent buy low spot for John Blackwell. I would suspect him to have a heavy amount of rostership, but this is one of those chalk pieces that I do agree with and will have plenty of exposure to as well. As for anyone else, it's kind of weird seeing Max Klesman at 6K above Blackwell. And yeah, I know he's put up 30 plus in 2 of his last 3. He's been hitting threes and actually facilitating. But that is one of those plays where, yes, he's doing well, but I'm not going to get caught using him. I wonder if people might chase that a little bit just because the logs look better than they do for Blackwell. But if you have played for the entire season or watched any of Wisconsin basketball, you know Blackwell is pretty head and shoulders above Klesmit as an overall option. Klesmit can get hot here, but give me the $200 discount on Blackwell. And then the front court options, Nolan Winter and Steven Crowell. If you got to use one, Steven Crowell would be the option to look at. If he can stay out of foul trouble, he's been very good on the glass. He can hit shots. Nolan Winter's minutes have been kind of all over the place. He did play 28 against Purdue and looked better, but he was, dare I say, more of a non-con hero because once conference play started, the minutes went down and the overall production has struggled as well. He is cheap at 5'3", but I don't know that I can continue to let him hurt me. So I will lay off of him and probably Crowell and get myself to John Blackwell as my main Wisconsin exposure. All right, so we did it. We just over an hour. Speed running there. I feel pretty damn good about that. Let's get into some questions here. My man Steve Boynton here. Illinois minutes are real tough to pin down today outside of the studs. Yeah, I read the article, and obviously Coach Speak is Coach Speak about Trey White, so I'm kind of banking on that. But yeah, it could very easily, like, can't forget about Dre Gibbs Lawhorn, right? Like, he could be the one to start after all. We've seen that. Jake Davis looming. He did play 15 minutes last game, so we could see some more Davis. Will Riley should play a bunch, so it's definitely going to be tough, and I think might be a determiner of the slate, right? If we get Trey White right. But I do think he's going to be kind of heavily owned. I could be wrong about that, but it just seems like that'd make the most logical sense. If Gibbs Lawhorn were to start at only 3-2, he would make a lot of sense there too. But I just don't know if the pay-ups, you might have a different take there, but the pay-ups just don't feel that great. Let me load all my teams back up. This is one of those weird slates. We've had a lot of them lately where the pay-ups, it's like, yeah, I got the value, but man, well, I don't have a Janai Broom. I don't have a Cooper Flag. Like, yeah, we got JT Toppin, but he feels a little bit risky. Braden Smith is usually a rock, but man, I just don't know. I don't know if we're going to have the big scores that we saw the other day on the Axel slate. Could be wrong about that though, but some of this value definitely feels volatile. But one way we can do it is just load up those 7K to 8K range options, right? So, but yeah, Illinois is going to be a big point of contention here on the slate. Bear with me here as I add all these back, and then we'll look at the total board. We'll talk a little bit about a core, and then we'll head out of here. I am usually at night we are rambling on for a bit, and we get to rapping and talking. So I wanted to be very fast here. So I actually give myself a pat on the back here for keeping this under 90 minutes, especially when my daughter keeps opening the door and staring at me. All right, let's see here. I can only imagine what I'm about to walk to in there. I know a lot of you guys have young kids as well, and I can just imagine what the living room is going to look like when I walk back in there. But that's okay. That's okay. You know, we have persevered here. That's one of the things people ask me all the time is how I do it with young kids, and the answer is I don't know. I just don't know. I have a very patient wife. I tell you that. All right, that's all there. Let's do this. Bony ball, booty. All right, Trey White or Riley Kugel in GPPs that both start. I'd probably say Kugel there. Maybe Trey White's more risky than I'm like thinking, but I do think Riley Kugel would be the one that would be lower owned, so I will go him. I am on Melendez more in my main lineup and Trey White. Maybe I'm married to Trey White a little bit too much. I'll have to get out to some of the Illinois fans that I know and see, but I'd actually be fine with both. But I think Riley Kugel does have a little more upside here overall with the matchup. Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate you stopping by. Yeah, I'll be in the Discord. As soon as I get off of here, I'll have the article and projection sheet out and refined and ready to roll. All right, so here we go. You can see ignore this over here, obviously not out. You can see the top projections here. Micah Hand logged in, Elijah Martin, Hassan Diarra, all the semi-cheapies there. So the core for me right now would be Hassan Diarra, RJ Melendez, and probably Elijah Martin. Expecting him to start. I'd almost prefer him not to, because I think that would keep his ownership down, but you can see those three are at the top of the projection board. I don't normally have my core roll out that way, but doing a daytime show allowed me to have the sheet pretty much done, minutes projected, news in, and all that. So that's where I stand at the moment there. Some really interesting looks there, but it's looking like some mini stack action on Mississippi State, Florida, perhaps Iowa State there. Obviously Josh Jefferson, Keyshawn Gilbert, both good looks. So we can get ourselves a pretty solid and sound mid-range build here and still use the value as well. But we don't necessarily have to go up and pay for Braden Smith and JT Toppin. So we'll see how it shakes out. I'll be very interested to see what the optimal lineup ends up being in the 20K. Hopefully it's myself or one of you guys watching right now. But yeah, it's going to be a very fun overall slate. I do have a couple best bets. Let me get those in. And if there's any questions, go ahead and fire those out. Stetson at home versus North Florida. It's plus 6.5. I like Stetson action there. Jones. Let's see. A lot of MAC action here. I do mention earlier the Syracuse plus 10.5. I just don't know if I believe in Pittsburgh to cover that. It's less about Syracuse and more about Pittsburgh, I'd say. BYU minus 2.5. That's a chalky one, though. I know everybody's on that and their mother, but it just seems like such an obvious spot for BYU, right? I do like Boston College. Sorry, Steve. I know the Hokies are your team. I do like Boston College to win outright, but I've thought Boston College would win outright in their last 3 games, and that has not gone as well. So, but I'm going to keep firing that out there. And then Fresno State, San Diego State. It's a 19.5 point spread, but I like the under 140.5 there. Have had a lot of success, by the way. I don't know how many of you guys do live betting. If you don't, you should definitely consider it. I know a lot of you do. But live betting totals lately has been a really profitable venture at the mid-major and low-major level. So start maybe spitting those out in the Discord there as I bet them, and anyone that wants to tail on those ones, because that's been a pretty good last 3 or 4 days, just betting totals and kind of supplementing our income. This is Mark Zilla. I don't think as active as Mark is in the Discord, I don't think I've ever seen him talk on YouTube. So I'm going to assume that that's my man, Mark Zilla. 10X play of the day. Well, that's usually what you would give us, but I'll give you one. Let's see. It's got to be somebody obscure. RJ Smith. RJ Smith with a 30 piece. It's going to be tough, but I do like RJ Smith to get some garbage time action in there against Iowa State. Also, as far as a posh play, I haven't been giving those as much lately because there's just been so much overlap on the slates. As far as a kind of a lower owned look, have to qualify. They have to be under 20% owned. Right, and hit at least 5X number. I do think Josh Jefferson qualifies as today's posh play of the day. Would expect Gilbert to be more owned, but Jefferson just has such a huge DVP spot here against Colorado. I don't think anybody on that team is going to be able to stop him. So I expect a big game from Josh Jefferson. The only one that can really stop him would be himself picking up dumb fouls. So I think that is a good stopping point. We'll wrap it up there. Not Ty Berry. All right. Yeah, Ty Berry. Appreciate it, Craig. Thanks for hanging out. I appreciate all the continued support, everybody that continues to show up and hang out with us in the community. It's been great. And a lot of you have checked us out, gone to the FTN fantasy page and joined the community. Lots of fun stuff happening and lots more in the works. And intro we'll be back. We're working on a song, some clips and stuff there, so we won't get flagged by YouTube for playing music anymore. But I do appreciate it. Thanks very much, everybody, and best of luck tonight. Hope one of you is a 20K winner, and definitely tag me on Twitter if that happens. We'll be back tomorrow, so we're going to go with the daytime show again. We'll be back tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. PST, 1 p.m. Eastern. We're going to ride out the daytime shows for a while, but still be on Friday night as well. Thanks, guys. Take care, and see you later.